Hello and welcome to God I Hear You. I'm your host, Renee, and today's title is Make Room. We're going to open up by reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 31, to Genesis, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And it reads, And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Sometimes when we're tired, we forget our power. We forget the promises of God. We forget that we were chosen for higher calling. Today, we are going to unpack the importance of making room for you, making room to recharge yourself, making room for just sitting back and just being whole within yourself. Many of us have callings on our lives to pursue passions that are carefully crafted by God, and we set out on these journeys with high energy, but we fail because we forget to hit the pause button. We forget to make room for us. We forget that we need recharging in these seasons of outpour. And if you're anything like me, oh boy, I set out my whole life to be a high performer. I enjoy getting the job done at work, whatever it is that someone asks me to do, I really want to excel in it. And this goes even into my friendships and my relationships. I live to create enjoyment and be a part of happy moments. That makes me happy. It's a part of my being. It's a part of my love language, is to literally pour into other people. And it's so interesting. I remember the topic came up of like, what are your love languages? And I know everyone probably did that test of these are mine, these are mine. And when I shared mines are actually words of affirmation and physical touch. And trust me, I have some friends that cannot stand that I love physical touch. Like, I love to hug my friends. I love to just be mushy, and it doesn't have to always be just like you only like to physical touch with your significant other. No, me, I like it with everyone. I'm that friend. And so with all of that, the person that I was talking about this love language with said to me, Renee, you give all five. Like, you give all five and you only require two. And I was like, wow, like I didn't even see it like that. But that's just naturally my personality and everything I do. And with that comes a lot. Sometimes you have the feeling of I'm outpouring and I feel like I'm not being poured back into. And you have to remind yourself, like, Renee, not everyone is you. And some people can only love you with that level that they can give. And that's completely okay. But I find that with my personality of always wanting to be a high person of energy, a supportive person, sometimes I feel exhausted. And so today we're going to talk about the importance of making room for you. Making room to recharge yourself is so important. And when I was thinking of this and I was in deep, prayer, Elijah came to mind. And I really feel like Elijah is like a underdog. I hate to even call him that, but honestly, when I look back, I'm like, I feel like I knew the name Elijah was in the Bible, but it took me like reading to really like be like, oh, Elijah was a heavy hitter. Like he was just doing you're like, wow, God was really like had his hand on you. And so we're going to talk about the story of Elijah, and we're going to really unpack like what his purpose was and what his turning point was. So Elijah was a prophet who was assigned by God really to get the kings of Israel back in order. And so just to rewind a little bit to give you some historical context because I don't expect everyone to be a Bible bumper, and we get in there together because I don't know everything. So, pretty much King David. So David was the individual in the Bible that made the Psalms. And I feel like that's like a Bible chapter that everyone is pretty much familiar with. Like there's so much encouragement in that. It's so much vulnerability in that. And I know me, myself, I always go back to Psalms, especially when I need words of encouragement and just like even prayers. I'm like, Psalms 91, protection prayer. Amen. So after King David, who was anointed by God, his son, King Solomon, ended up being king. Now, King Solomon, he literally went completely against God's word. He went against God and he started off good, but really took a detour. And so, because of his direct disobedience to God, the kingdom of Israel was actually split. So, King David's bloodline was split because of his son Solomon. And so, after King Solomon, everything was just in utter chaos. Like, if you read First Kings, you're just like, I be trying to tell y'all the Bible has so much tea, but y'all got to get in the word to see what I'm talking about. First Kings is just you just cannot believe the chaos that is going on. So all of this chaos is pretty much stemming from the disobedience of King Solomon. And so there were many different rulers that came in, and it was deemed that they were just doing complete evil. And honestly, as the years go by, you're just like, and you're reading, you're like, wow, this person did evil in the sight of God. Like it just keeps expanding. And it's like you're waiting for like one person to be like, let me do right. So there comes a point that through this lineage, through this time frame, King Jeroboam comes into power. And you know you got to be trifling if God uses you as an example. So King Jeroboam, whatever his name is, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And I'm going to read what it says about him. In 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 2, it says, I lifted you up from the dust and appointed you ruler over my people of Israel. But you followed the ways of Jeroboam and caused my people of Israel to sin and to arouse my anger by their sins. So God is literally pointing out that Jeroboam was just absolutely evil. He used him as an example. And so after King Jeroboam, there were different rulers, but one in particular, named King Ahab took the cake. So this is what happens with King Ahab. So 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 29 through 32. It reads, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any other before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, that's who we just said that God used as example and said he was evil. So now we're saying King Ahab is even more evil than Jeroboam. But here's what the word says, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal, and he built in Samaria. Ahab also made a Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. Now, this is not the type of name you want to have for yourself. God said that King Jeroboam was just evil. He used him as an example. And now he's saying someone that came after, King Ahab, is even more evil than Jeroboam, and used him as an example. And there's something that I want to really point out to you here, because I feel like you all might be familiar with Jezebel. So Jezebel was married to King Ahab. And I know in Christian culture, a big, I would say, offensive statement to make to someone is when they say, oh, that person's carrying that Jezebel spirit. So Jezebel was, I would say, one of the biggest witches in history. And to say that someone carries that spirit is basically saying like they're of the devil, pretty much. She was very wicked, and her main goal was to kill and eradicate all the prophets. Anyone that was serving God was on her hit list. So the fact that King Ahab married Jezebel, that is a union literally not made in heaven, the other place. So God being a merciful God, because even when you're doing wrong, he will send signs, he will send people, he will send things to shake you up to try to get you back together. And so that's where Elijah comes in. Elijah is a prophet, and Elijah was pretty much that individual that God appointed to get these kings in order, because it just kept getting worse, clearly. Nobody was doing better, just getting worse. And so Elijah has this entry into the book of Kings that is so powerful. It's literally a mic dropping moment. Let me read to you how it starts off for Elijah. So in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 6, it reads, Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. So we have Elijah the prophet that's now going to King Ahab, who is married to Jezebel. King Ahab likes to be evil himself, and he's married to the wicked witch of the west, pretty much. You have Elijah, who is a known prophet of God, going to King Ahab saying, well, just so you know, it's not going to rain, not even the dew there ain't going to be no dew on the grass until my word. One, let's unpack this. Jezebel is literally ordering hits on people, killing the prophets. But you said, I'm going to be obedient. God wants me to go to Ahab and tell him this message. That's bold. That is courage. That is a lot. And so Elijah says this mic dropping moment, and literally the next thing that says is, this is what it reads. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith Ravin, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to Kerith Ravin, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So at this point, after he said that mic dropping, you ain't gonna have no rain, no dew, they're in a famine now. He leaves because God told him to leave, and pretty much put him on the run because he knew that King Ahab and Jezebel were going to try to kill him. And so now Elijah's on the run, and he's being obedient still, and he has all the resources that he needs. He has ravens, which are birds, coming to feed him. Can we talk about God? If he asks you to do something, he will supply for you. That to me is so powerful. And so as Elijah is in this obedience on the run, God gives him another word. And the next message is to go into, let me read it. Here's what it says. Then the word of the Lord came to him, arise, go to Zarpath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So you can see Elijah is traveling. He's on the run there, and he's just doing everything that God has asked him to do. He now goes to Zarephath and he meets this widow. And as we talked about earlier, there's a severe famine because, as Elijah said, there's no rain, not even dew on the grass until he says, which is going to come from directly from God to Elijah. So when he meets this widow, she's on her last. She only got a little bit of oil. She got a little bit of flour. And Elijah approaches her and says to her, okay, yeah, like feed me. And this widow responds to him and she's like, I don't have anything. I was actually preparing my last meal for me and my son so we can just eat this meal and die. And Elijah says to her, do not fear. Go and do what you have said. He literally tells her to prepare him a cake, get it right. He gonna eat. And this lady's on her last and she's obedient. She's obedient. And he tells her, for thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and her household ate for many days. So you see, Elijah is literally in tune with God. He is saying things and they are happening live. So her obedience leads to her being blessed. She gave her last, and now God is confirming you ain't never going to run out. And also highlighting this until the rain comes back. So pretty much God is providing for her and her son throughout this whole famine. That's powerful. So Elijah stays with her. And while he's staying in this widow's home with the son becomes very, very ill to the point that he loses his life. And so that's where the story takes a pivot, because you're like, wow, you see that God just poured into this widow and her son because of her obedience, listening to Elijah, listening to God. And now calamity has struck. And so she's upset. She's, saying to Elijah, why has this happened to me? And the thing I enjoy about Elijah's personality, I feel like I would have get along well with Elijah. Elijah gonna say what he want to say. He gonna say it with respect, but he gonna say what he wants to say. And I think a lot of us need to really talk to God and be just as open but respectful of how we're feeling. So this is what Elijah says to God. O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son? Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again. I'm trying to tell y'all, Elijah is a heavy hitter. He an underdog that we don't talk about enough. You mean to tell me Elijah prayed for life to come back into a dead boy, and God heeded to that? God said, you know what? Let me listen. Let me do this. Let me do this for Elijah. I had to highlight these things so you could understand the role of Elijah, the things that he was doing, the miracles, how in tune he was with God. I had to highlight this because Elijah had so much of these moments that I'm telling you, you read 1 Kings, he was just, it was like bang, bang, bang. You're like, dang, like he doing so much. It's so much in there. And the last thing that I want to highlight about Elijah is that God actually said to him, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, saying, so now we're talking about 3 years. That's about 3 years of the famine. Things is hard. Saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. Ahab, King Ahab, the one that is killing the prophets with his wife, he's now asking Elijah to go back, get out of running, and go back and say, hey, this is what's going to happen. So Elijah goes back and he pretty much, speaks to, so Obadiah was also a follower of Christ, and he was a part of King Ahab's household. And so the first person that Elijah sees on his way back towards speaking to King Ahab is Obadiah. And he says to Obadiah, like, hey, Obadiah, it's me, Elijah. Go tell King Ahab I'm here. Because Obadiah knows where King Ahab is, because Obadiah, although he serves the Lord, he is within this household. He helps take care of certain things for the king, even though he was doing stuff on the side, like hiding prophets so they weren't killed. He was really doing stuff on the low. So Obadiah is like, Elijah, why are you here? Like, you want me to get killed by seeing you and talking with you. And Elijah's like, no, go send him. So this moment on Mount Carmel is so pivotal. So Elijah goes, he says to King Ahab, you know what? I'm here. Get your prophets of Baal. So these are the devil worshipers. Go get them. And it's just going to be me alone. And we're going to see this miracle play out. So Elijah asks them to go select a bull. He selects a bull. They cut it up. They each have different like sacrificial things set up. So back in the day, like people would sacrifice animals. They'll put them on sticks, stones, and like light it and burn it as a sacrifice. So Elijah asks for the prophets of Baal, which is 450 of them, to perform this miracle by calling upon their god, which is what was Baal. And he was going to call upon, obviously, the God that we serve, and for the sacrifice to be lit. So King Ahab, being cocky, he agreed to this. Like, yeah, my prophets could do that. No problem. And so the 450 prophets, they cut up their bull. They got it on the sticks and the stones, but Baal didn't pull up for them. No fire comes. The sacrifice isn't getting burned. And Elijah's like, wait a minute. This is who y'all serve? He not even lighting this up for y'all? Like, what's going on? And they're cutting themselves. They're doing everything, trying to get this sacrifice going to prove that Baal is who you're supposed to be worshiping. And Elijah, he's like, all right, we've been at this too long. Let me just show you. So Elijah took it to the next step. Now, Elijah, when I say he a heavy hitter for this, Elijah said, you know what, just to prove before they even say like, he lit a little fire, he snuck and did something. He said, bring me some water. Now, we in the middle of a famine. We talked about it. We've been in a famine now for like 3 years. Ain't no water, ain't no rain. So whatever is in storage is what is being used. So Elijah has some nerve. He said, bring me the water. He takes the water and he pours it all over. He's like, pour it on the sacrifice. Pour it on the sacrifice. He wants to prove to them that when I call God to light this on fire, just know that there was no tricks going on my end. So he does that a few times. Put that water on it. He calls on God. And sure enough, God himself is fire. God lit that sacrifice up. And everyone that was surrounding, all the people in the kingdom that was surrounded, watching this competition of Baal versus God, the prophets versus Elijah, recognized at that moment that they are serving the wrong God. And so at this point, Elijah says, now arrest all 450 of those prophets. And the kingdom is like, oh, he just proved that we need to be serving his God. So they arrested those prophets and the prophets of Baal, and they murdered them because they were so wicked and spreading this false doctrine throughout the kingdom and killing what we would say is Christians, the followers of God. And King Ahab saw all of this taking place. And so King Ahab at this point, he's seeing the prophets getting murdered. He's seeing the revolution coming like, oh, wow, like he knew there was going to be trouble in paradise. So he gets up, he runs back to go tell his witch wife, Jezebel, what Elijah just did. And at this point, I want to read it for you. Here's what it said. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. So that's what happened. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Let no one of them escape. And they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to the brook of Kishon and slaughtered them there. And Elijah said to Ahab, the king, go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain. So Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. And he bowed himself down on the ground and put his face between his knees. And he said to the servant, go up now, look toward the sea. And he went up and looked and said, there's nothing. And he said, go up 7 times. And then the 7th time he said, behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea. And he said, go up and say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you. And in a little while, the heavens grew black and clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garment and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. So as Elijah first stated in the beginning, when he had that entry, that mic dropping moment, that rain would not come until he said rain would come. And that's because he was in tune with God. Every single moment that we highlighted, you see Elijah's being obedient. Elijah's proving that God is real and God should be served, God should be honored. All of this is taking place. And we come to a point where now this famine has now ended, because throughout this famine, all that was done, God showed that he was God and sent the rain, which ended the famine, which goes back to the first thing that he told King Ahab. So there's so much in that. But here is where the story takes a surprising turn. And I was sitting here and I'm like, what? Like, what could have happened? And so here's what it says. 1 Kings chapter 19, 1-8. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. I mean, you know he was going to tell her. So this is what Jezebel does. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, but it ever be so severely. It by this time tomorrow, I do not make your life like that of one of them. I'm going to read that again. May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that one of them. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Wait a minute. Elijah, that was just fed by ravens. When he said rain, it rained. When he called upon God to light up that sacrifice, God lit it up. When he was with the widow and her son died, he prayed to God and God put life back into that son. This could not be the same Elijah that we're talking about, that it says Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Wait a minute. I said, what? Elijah was afraid? Do you see how God was stepping side with him? God had, it literally earlier said God had his hand on Elijah. So what could have caused Elijah to be afraid and run for his life? So let me read. It says, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. This is what Elijah said. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Wow. You mean to tell me Elijah, who was clearly anointed by God to get the kings of Israel's back in line? You saw it. We spoke about it time and time again. Elijah was being obedient, and due to his obedience, God was stepping with him, stepping ahead of him. And the things that he was saying to people were literally stamped, sealed, signed by God. How could Elijah, this one, be afraid, running for his life, and now asking to die and saying he's no better than his ancestors? And I was like, man, what could make Elijah feel that way? And this is what it says. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank, strengthened by food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. So let's unpack this. We know what Elijah said. We know how Elijah's feeling. He's afraid. He's on the run. He's asking to die. He's claiming things over himself that's not even true, saying he's not even better than his ancestors. And I noticed here two things that was highlighted to me. Elijah was burnt out. Elijah was tired. He was tired. The fact that it says he fell asleep and all at once an angel came to him and said, get up and eat. On top of him being tired and burnt out, he wasn't recharging himself. He wasn't making room for himself. He wasn't filling himself. He's doing such an outpour. He is literally walking with God, doing everything that God set for him to do. But Elijah needed to be recharged. He needed more than just food. Yes, he got food, but he needed a spiritual recharge. And that's so key, because on our journeys, we have those high moments. We've seen, granted, we had never going to compare ourselves to Elijah, but we have those high moments in life where we are on 10. And then we can go from 10 to being on 1. Because if we're always living our life on that 10 without recharging ourselves, without pouring back into ourselves, we're going based on fumes. And the angel allowed him to rest, which is funny because I'm like, the angel saw him rest, gave him food, then came back again and said, get up and eat. So he allowed him to rest. And he told him, get up and drink, and that Elijah was strengthened by the food. Elijah needed a refreshment. He needed a recharge. He needed that because Elijah was, because of his burnout, Elijah was forgetting who he was. He was forgetting his calling. And I feel like a lot of us have those Elijah moments. A lot of us, we come to a point where we are so burnt out, we are so tired that we literally we forget who we are. And I know, me personally, I have been there. I have had those moments, and it takes me back to a time where I was working at a staffing agency. Whew, that was my first job after graduating with my master's. My first job, it was my first salary job. And I was working that job, and it was like, it's a lot of expectations. Like, this is your first salary job, so you wanna do what's right. But the job was so stressful, and the environment was just so toxic and crazy. And so I remember being at this job, and there was times that on my way to work, I was just like, honestly, near tears. Like, I didn't want to go. I was so exhausted. It was just so overwhelming. And I remember one time being at that job. And at this point, I'm applying for other jobs, by the way. I remember being at this job, and I had a meeting with my manager or director. Can't remember what the title was. And I remember looking outside the window, and I saw Hartford Healthcare outside the window from the staffing agency that I'm working at. And it was almost like this weird peace, and then not even weird, it was like a divine peace came over me that said, you're not going to stay here, Renee. You're going to go there. And it was Hartford Healthcare. And God being God, he ended up allowing me, after many trials, because I was interviewing, I done had, I think, 3 interviews with Hartford Healthcare, if I'm remembering it correctly, and I didn't get the job. And I'm like, but I felt like God was telling me to go to Hartford Healthcare. And the last interview I had was for this sourcing role. And I really didn't want that role. It's like a sourcing role is a talent acquisition. You find applicants, but you're doing like a lot of legwork versus like a recruiter. It's more hands-on. Like, sourcing is like you're finding different tips and tricks to find talent, versus the recruiter is like, people are applying, you're putting on, talent shows, not talent shows, like, you're trying to find talent, putting on those job marketing stuff. So that's what I really wanted. But I applied for the sourcing role, and I didn't get it. And I was like, you know what, at this point, I don't know if I'm gonna apply to Hartford Healthcare again. And a few weeks later, I get a call, and the call is from the director, if I'm remembering correctly. And she says, you didn't get the sourcing role, and I just really loved how you interviewed. So I actually opened up a recruiter role, and I wanted to see if you were interested in it. Like, I do think we need the help of another recruiter. I think it'll be great for you. So literally, the job didn't even exist. She opened up a new role and offered me the job. And the job was for a recruiter, which is a job that I actually wanted. Can we talk about God? Like, God is so good. So I get this job, and I'm working there. I'm getting trained. I'm feeling good. Like, thank God I'm out of that last role. But this role came with its adversity as well. Because I feel like I was so grateful for this opportunity. I was working myself, down to the ground. Like, I was doing sometimes 10 hours, 12 hours, just working. And I was reaching a point of exhaustion that I can't even express. And at this time, like, on top of the work being like that, I was actually in a new relationship. He lived relatively like an hour away from me. So it was just so much different things going on that I was getting used to a new job, new relationship. I was feeling very stretched thin. And I was so focused on getting the job done and being so stellar that I was not making room for myself at all. And even between this, I started having a little bit of adversity at work, like, people just acting, it was just a lot. And I was pushing through. I was pushing through. I wasn't letting anything get to me. But there was a moment where I started to feel like I was going to sleep and I wouldn't stop thinking about work. I'm like, "Oh, I have 16 job offers to get." And I'm telling you, that's how it is there. Like that place is like the powerhouse of Connecticut, in my humble opinion. I'm doing like 16 job offers in a day. It's crazy. And I'm thinking about that I was starting to get like sort of anxious, and to the point that I couldn't even rest well because I knew all the tasks that I had set for the next day. I was already thinking about it. And it came to a point where at the time I was with my ex and we went out to eat. And we're just talking, kikiing, just enjoying our little time together. And he says to me, "Oh, Renee, it looks like your hairdresser snipped you in the back." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So he like takes a picture of my head and there's like a big old bald spot. So I'm like, dang, I feel like me and my hairdresser kind of locked in. Like, I feel like she would have told me if she snipped me. So I think at that point I text her like, "Hey girl, you snipped me in the back." And she's like, "No, Renee, I didn't snip you." And I'm like, "I figured you didn't, so I don't know what it is." And I'm like, wait a minute, what is it? Lo and behold, that wasn't the only spot. I had multiple spots. I ended up having stress-induced alopecia, where there started to be circles of bald spots in my hair. And I was absolutely devastated because, I'm a short hair girly. I love to switch it up sometimes, but this is like my go-to look. So now that I'm having bald spots in the back, I'm like, dang, I can't wear my short hair. And I was so sad. And the first things you always point out is like, God, why? Why? Like, why this? And it hit me, even as I was, getting this together, it hit me like, how dare you, Renee? God brought you from a place in which you hated your job. You hated working at the staffing company. He gave you the job at Hartford Healthcare. Now you're asking why he has inflicted this stress alopecia on you? That's not it. Renee, that's not how you're supposed to view life. God was just telling me I needed to pivot. I needed to manage myself better. I needed to make room for me. I can't function on being like and just be so focused on being a perfectionist. I have to make room for me. And that stress alopecia caused me to really get my life back in order. It's crazy how adversity will do that. And actually I was a little thick too at this time. So because of all that stress that I didn't even realize it was causing me to lose my hair, I said, you know what? I got to make room for me. I really got to take control of my stress and just start taking care of myself. So I really went on a real deep healthcare journey, just like filling myself up, self-care journey. I started working out. I ended up losing 30 pounds, almost 30 pounds. I started getting massages monthly. I just started taking care of myself, making sure that I shut off when I needed to shut off. Sometimes I had to put my phone on D&D. I had to really just like make room for me. And through that, through me taking care of myself, losing weight, and I started to see that some of the bald spots my hair started growing back in there because I was lowering my stress by making room for me. And that is just so important. We have to make room for us because as I was in this new season of my life, doing this podcast, I'm in a new city relatively. I'm working this new job. I have a new podcast. I started feeling like how I was feeling Back in like 2020, 2019, I started feeling so overwhelmed. And I remember calling my brother. I'm like, Kyle, I'm tired. And my brother, he said, oh, Renee, my brother has that spiritual discernment. He was like, Renee, I already knew how you were feeling before you told me. You need to rest. You need to rest. I was starting to feel all those feelings. I'm lowering how I'm working out. That's not really, granted, we have our seasons because, I ain't gonna blame it on that. Like, I wasn't working out. I wasn't feeling my best self. I wasn't pouring into myself. And in this season of doing such an outpour, I have to make sure that I'm taking care of me. And so God, my brother was like, Renee, I really do think that you need to rest. Even in podcasts and shows, he's telling me, they rest. They have breaks. They take time and do seasons. He was like, you need to look at that because if you keep moving the way you're doing, it's not healthy. And then you're going to end up not operating out of God, but operating out of flesh. And that to me did it for me because a lot of us fail to understand that although we are progressing in one way, we are regressing in other ways. I call that progressive regression. You're doing good at work, you're hitting those scores, but inside you get an anxiety, you're not feeling good, you're not taking care of yourself. Everything else is regressing, but you're progressing in one area. You have to have balance. You have to make room for you. And we live in a society that is always on edge. We have social media that makes it worse. We see someone at 25 is a millionaire, then we want to compete. Not me, but there's so much high expectations in this world. So if we're not making room for us, we're not highlighting, the importance of rest, we literally will run ourselves down to the ground. We'll run ourselves down to the ground. And I say all of this to say is that in order to be successful, in order to really make impact, you have to set times for you. This is just for our nourishment. There's mothers, I see mothers and fathers. I tip my hat off to you all. Like they have these kids, they're doing all this stuff. And sometimes they're running themselves down to the ground because they want to make sure that they're progressing, they're doing these things for their children, but they still need to fill themselves back up. So my message to you is don't let it get you to a point that you're asking God to die. Elijah was asking God to die because of his burnout. Recognize, hit the pause button. We opened up by reading from the book of Genesis, where God, after 6 days of him creating the earth and everything in it, he rested. He rested and he glorified that day. He made that day holy. If God himself, after 6 days, is saying, let me hit the pause button. Let me just relax and kick back and enjoy all the work that I've done. Why don't we hit that pause button? Why don't we pause and rejuvenate ourselves and make room for ourselves? We have to do this. And so I'm going to close by reading from the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. And it reads, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Make room for you. Pour into yourself. Be in tune with God. Because in order to be successful, in order to fulfill the promises of God on your life so that you can walk into purpose, you have to hit pause. You have to. So as I close, today was about making room. I need to make room. I can't function out of the speed of push, push, push all the time because I don't want to operate out of flesh. I want to operate out of the Spirit of God. I want to be filled. I am going to be taking some rest myself. to take care of me so that when I come back, I can be refreshed, recharged, and ready to go. So today, we're going to be ending season 1. We have accepting the call. We have be bold, courage, debilitating doubt. God will equip you, fighting forgiveness. We have heart posture, God's will, influence, justice, loose ends, and we have make room. God needs you to rest. You're not you. It's so funny. You know that Snicker commercial? It's like, you're not you when you're hungry. That is so true. You're not you when you're not taking that time for yourself. So take that time for yourself. We finished up season 1. I feel blessed and I am so happy of the work that God has done to me, because as much as I'm posting and I'm putting these podcasts out, I really want you to understand that all those podcasts are for me. It's for me. It's a message from God to me to do better, to be better. So we went through A through M. And season 2, we're going to finish the alphabet. For those that have been following me, you know that we're going through the alphabet. We're going to do N through Z in season 2. I'll be gone for a little bit, just a little bit, not a long time, but I'm going to come back well rested and ready to go. So make room for you all. If you like this video, like it. If you want to share it, go ahead and share it, but make sure you're subscribing so that you can keep up to date with everything. Season 2 will be here soon, and I'm looking forward. All right, y'all. Love y'all. Peace.